What's going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having a wonderful day. So the most requested video after doing the Jagatai Primarch video from Amber King was to get into Konrad Curze next. So we're gonna do that. That's what the plan this week is, to get into Konrad Curze, the Amber King video from him, and to, as a precursor to that, we're gonna check out Arbiter Ian's Night Lords video, his overview on the Night Lords and the Horus Heresy, and the origins and lore of that. So that's the plan. We are doing this reaction live, so if you want to, you can come in here and click the join button down below. Check out the membership tiers, see if any of those membership tiers have any kind of interest in you, where you have pre and post discussions that we do with the members at the VIP tier for any of these live reactions that we do. So if you want to come in and join those discussions, check that out. As always, there will be a link down below in the description for this original video without my commentary and without my reaction, and to Arbiter Ian's channel. So if you want to check out his content in this video, please go down in the description and check out those links below. Definitely give him at least a sub and a like on this video. He's a great content creator, makes a lot of Warhammer 40k stuff, and he's got a Patreon. He's got all kinds of ways to support him, so if you want to go that extra mile and support him further, please do so. But for now, let's get into this video. All shameless plugs done. Bada boom, bada bing.
The Night Lords of Warhammer 40,000 are some of the most unsettling villains in the setting. Hundreds of self-serving warbands of traitor space marines, preying on isolated worlds across the Imperium, descending from orbit to slaughter and terrorize for nothing more than their own pleasure. But this isn't some change that happened as the heresy unfolded. It was the same role they occupied right from the start, a role that was honed in service to the Emperor and the Imperium.
So I've done a video previously from Amber King on Sevatar, who was one of the generals for Konrad Curze, and I know that Konrad was kind of almost like a Batman type character in a way. He hated villains and wanted to see them punished, and he took the punishments to the extreme of really slaughtering them and torturing them and doing extreme things to villains and criminals and whatnot on his home planet. And he basically cleaned up the crime on that planet and put it down to nothing. And so that's kind of translated into his Legion. And I know he's kind of a tragic-ish character in the sense that, he was trying to he did a lot of terrible things for the greater good kind of a situation. And it really messed with his mind, because the more of as he did worse and worse things, he felt how bad, he was getting and the things that he was doing. But again, it was for the greater good, so he felt it was kind of justified, but it kind of drove him mad. That's for the most part really what I know of him and of the Night Lords from that Sevatar video that I've watched already. So let's see what else we learn here from Arbiter Ian, and then the actual Konrad Curze video when we get into that.
Hi, welcome back to Heresy 101. In this little series, I'm going to go through the lore for each of Warhammer's Space Marine legions, particularly their origin in the grim days of the Horus Heresy. I'll take a look at where they are at the start of the heresy and how they got there, what happens to them during the heresy, and what made them what they are. Anyway, before I start, this video contains spoilers for the Horus Heresy Black Books and the Black Library novel series, and probably anything about to be released.
I don't know. I'm okay with spoils for the most part. Spoils don't really bother me. As I've said in previous videos, it's one thing to hear something that's going to happen, but it's another to read it or see it in the context of the actual story and video. You know what I mean? It has a different kind of impact. So for the most part, spoils don't really bother me.
At the end of the Great Crusade, as the Imperium's efforts started to turn away from conquest and towards administration, few legions occupied as precarious a position as the Night Lords. Since their inception as the VIII Legion, they've been the bloody hand of Imperial rule, sanctioned terror troops who made grim examples of traitors. But as the Crusade moved on and the fatalistic influence of their Primarch and his homeworld made itself felt, any pretense at justice fell away, and before the heresy even broke out, they were a renegade legion in all but name. The history of the VIII Legion, like all the legions, starts during the unification wars on Terra in the 31st millennium. Earth at the time was a patchwork of warring states led by despots and dictators, scrabbling for what few resources the planet.
This is very... This Murica, okay. I wonder if it was actually called Murica or if that's just, you know, a joke. But it's interesting to see how like fractured the continents were and what the world looks like. And I guess the oceans have dried up, so this is all just like desert. There's actually jungles left there. Hi, Brazil. Interesting. So Africa. So I guess that's part of Africa that broke out, and that's like this what's left of South Africa, the Himalayas. I believe the Himalayas is where the Emperor had set up his like main base, and that's where he was working on the Primarchs. I don't know. I just find this very interesting, seeing how Earth was split up, or Terra back then.
States led by despots and dictators, scrabbling for what few resources the planet had left. Its cities, a selection of ancient hives built and rebuilt for thousands of years over the ruins of previous settlements. After 5,000 years of isolation and strife, the Emperor's armies forced peace with the threat of destruction, the Thunder Legions of the early Imperium either destroying those warlords that stood against them, or persuading them to swear fealty to the Emperor. When the Emperor started the Astartes project and the 20 legions started to slowly build their numbers, many legions took recruits from all across ancient Terra, from all of these cities. But it seemed that the Emperor had a plan for the 8th Legion. These ancient hives used their undercities as prisons. The warrens of linked tunnels and ruins underground were a convenient place to dispose of undesirables. And the prison sinks of Terra had become a lightless no man's land where only the most brutal of murderers had a chance of survival. But as the years went on, it wasn't just prisoners that populated the sinks. Children were born down there who had never seen the sun, pale stalkers in the darkness, born killers who survived in whatever way they could. And it was from these children that the 8th Legion was built.
See, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I still say that when Henry Cavill and Amazon do their, you know, cinematic Warhammer universe, I still say that a really good starting place, this has nothing to do with this video, but just from what they're talking about here, because that pertains to the Unification Wars, I think the Unification Wars would be a great place to start. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be from the perspective of the Emperor. It could be from Malcador's perspective, or from one of the surviving Thunder Legion warriors' perspectives, and he's telling, you know, what happened. But I think the Unification Wars would be a great place to start, because as far as humanity's perspective goes, that's really the Unification Wars is the start of the 40k timeline for humanity, you know, at that point. So I think it would be a good idea for them to do the Unification Wars for at least a couple seasons, and then have that lead into the creation of the Primarchs and the Astartes, and then the Primarchs getting scattered, and that leads into probably the Horus Heresy, which I would assume is what they are going to mainly do. I mean, there's so much. That's like the main story in 40k is the Horus Heresy, and there's so many characters and so much lore and so much stuff they could do that it would almost be crazy not to, and it's all outlined for them. So as long as they follow the source material, it should be a great success seeing that translated into a cinematic universe. But anyway, back to the video.
Survived in whatever way they could, and it was from these children that the 8th Legion was built.
Oh, that's actually the point of what I was bringing up here. I'm just saying, like, for me, it would be interesting to see the Unification Wars, just to see like the progression of like what humanity was then to what humanity becomes before the Horus Heresy starts, and then kind of like humanity struggling after the Horus Heresy, you know, and what is the 40k present timeline, just to see those different changes. Because, like, you know, during the Unification Wars, humanity is basically just a bunch of barbaric techno tribes. It's basically like a Mad Max, you know, world where the strongest survive and rule. And then the Emperor unites them and sets out on this great, you know, crusade and conquest of the universe, and really brings humanity into a new era. And almost kind of another, I don't know, golden age is really the proper term, but another kind of almost era of enlightenment and rediscovery and exploration. And then the Horus Heresy shatters that, and now humanity's, you know, regressed in certain ways, but still, you know, keeping the faith alive and still going out and exploring and doing what it's doing. And like, humanity is kind of on the comeback now in the 40k present timeline again. The Primarch are starting to come back, and things are starting to kind of get together, and it seems like humanity is about to kind of go on another rise again. So I don't know. I feel like them showing that progression of from where humanity was in the Unification Wars and how the Emperor kind of united humanity, then going into the real meat of the 40k lore in the Horus Heresy with the Primarchs, and then going up to what is currently going on in the present day 40k. I feel like that would be a great way to do it. If I were in charge and I had to say, that's what I would do. And again, I wouldn't necessarily like do it from the Emperor's perspective, because the whole idea obviously behind the Emperor is that he's a very ambiguous character. No one really knows, you know, everything about him other than maybe Malcador. Malcador's probably the only one that knows who he actually really is and what his actual real plan is. But, you know, you would want to keep him more of this ambiguous. I don't know, maybe they actually would want to, you know, maybe Games Workshop wants to actually get into more of the Emperor and who he really was and what his character is really about, and they could do that in the cinematic universe, you know, because it hasn't been done in the books. So that would be, you know, another unique thing they could do to get more people to want to watch the show. I don't think that would be a great idea personally, just because I still think you want to keep the Emperor as an ambiguous, you know, kind of godlike character with a plan that no one really knows but himself, kind of a thing. I think you want to keep that perspective. I think that gives them much more mystery and mystique. You know, but I feel like the Unification Wars is a unique setting that hasn't been done in the books. You know, it's only really been talked about and mentioned a little bit in the books. So doing the Unification Wars as like a start to the cinematic universe would be something that no one has really fully seen yet. It's only really just been talked about a little bit, and it would be a way to kind of, you know, a great, like, kind of unique thing to do to like boost the cinematic universe, I guess. I'm not really describing what I'm thinking very well. I'm having a brain fart at the moment, but you understand what I mean. It's something unique that's not been done, and it would kind of bolster, I guess. I don't know if bolster is the right word, but it would just add more to the show. You know, it would give the show something more, you know, more, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to really say, but anyway, long tangent. Let's get back to the video.
Who survived in whatever way they could. And it was from these children that the VIII Legion was built. The gene seed of the missing 8th Primarch seemed to suit them well, if anything making them even paler. The new warriors of the 8th were serious, stoic, and humorless, with a tendency towards moral absolutism. There were no shades of grey for the children of the Sinks, just right and wrong, justice or death, or both. And the Emperor seems to have used this. Unification was a messy business, and it wasn't unheard of for cities to swear fealty only to turn against the Imperium later, and it was these that the 8th was deployed against. A retribution force that descended on betrayers and made bloody examples of them.
They were the Punishers.
Were horrors, a threat hidden behind the open hand of the Imperium, and this role as the bloody judgment of the Emperor, as the necessary evil, was adopted by them and taken along with them into the Great Crusade. When the Legion was finally reunited with its Primarch, after almost 100 years of crusading, his adoptive homeworld, Nostramo, would initially seem eerily similar to the prison sinks that birthed the Legion itself, but its influence would force a subtle and unexpected change on the silent warriors of the 8th. Nostromo was a post-industrial world of smog and darkness. Previously a mining world, vast crevices had been dug into its surface, and around them sprawling cities climbed into the polluted skies. Any authority and government had long devolved into criminal organizations who styled themselves as a twisted, corrupt noble class, and were as self-serving as the gangs who ran the streets. In the mines and factories which still turn the planet's wheels of industry, the gangs went by names that echoed with false authority. The Iron Overseers, the Hands of Caragado, the Sons of Toil. Slab-muscled and furnace-scarred, they walked the streets clanking with weaponry and reeking of murder, enforcing order that was little more than slavery. It was into this that the pod of the 8th Primarch Konrad Curze landed. Scattered from Terra by a conspiracy and crashing deep into the sinks, the young Primarch survived alone, lurking in the depths, scavenging for scraps and eventually killing to stay alive. Though he kept away from the populace, through grisly meals he absorbed the knowledge of the people of the city, the gangs, the slavery and the ruling caste, and something spoke to him. He could have risen, probably quite easily, to rule the noble castes and the criminal organizations.
Yeah, it would have been really easy for him probably to just turn criminal and be a bad guy like from the start, and very easily just take over like the criminal underground and be this great criminal ruler. That's one of the things that I find kind of fascinating from what I've learned about him so far, is that he lived on this world where it would have been easy for him to be a criminal and risen to the heights of that, but he chose the opposite. He chose to be a vigilante and like punish criminals. You know, I find that pretty interesting.
He could have risen, probably quite easily, to rule the noble castes and the criminal organizations, but instead he embarked on a campaign of revenge against anyone he perceived as unjust, appearing from the dark to mutilate and murder, working from the bottom up. He became known to the population as the Night Haunter. He killed and mutilated until the streets fell quiet and his name was no longer a prayer for justice, but a plea of the fearful, and an entire world was cowed by sheer terror. When the cities slept in silence and the sound of gunfire was a rare murmur, he went before the aristocracy and gave them a choice: kneel and follow his law, or be destroyed. When the Emperor came to Nostromo, by this point already halfway into the crusade, he found a terrorized world. Curze submitted to his rule as if resigned to his fate already. He was cursed with the gift of premonition, and it's possible he already knew what was in store. And
that's right. That was also part of it too. So he had premonitions. So like, I think he knew how he was gonna die. Didn't he? Didn't he know how he was gonna die or something like that? I don't remember. But anyway. So that's interesting. So that would also be a very handy tool to be, depending on how your premonitions worked. Like if it was something you could really control, you know, that would be an extremely handy tool to, you know, fight your enemies, especially criminals, to be literally steps ahead of them. Plus you're already, you know, a Primarch with beyond even normal superhuman strength and abilities and senses.
as he departed, was cursed with the gift of premonition, and it's possible he already knew what was in store. And as he departed alongside his new legion, Nostromo's slide back into lawlessness began. Initially, the integration of Primarch and Legion went incredibly smoothly. Nostraman was adopted as the language of the Eighth, as were some of the gang rights and customs of the planet, and if anything, that drive to punish wrongdoers intensified amongst the Terrans that made up the Legion. However, as the second century of the Crusade ground on, the Legion changed. The recruits supplied from Nostramo, ruled once again by the syndicates,
yeah, there were more criminals,
from the bloodiest gutter gang members, and the character of the Legion.
And that would be interesting, because I would think because they became, you know, the world fell back more into crime, and a lot of the recruits are more criminal based. That would also kind of make him despise his own legions, right? Because he hated, you know, criminals and the unjust. So that would make him not want to have anything to do with his own legions. That's an interesting thing that I hadn't thought about before.
Legion by the syndicate,
if that's the case,
pulled from the bloodiest gutter gang members, and the character of the Legion changed from a stoic silence to the dark humor, casual cruelty, and fatalism that would become its hallmark. The horrific terror and violence the Eighth unleashed on their targets, the massacres and skinning pits, stopped being seen as a necessary.
Skinning pits, brother? That just sounds yummy. Skinning pits?
targets, the massacres and skinning pits, stopped being seen as a necessary lesson the Eighth were forced to enact, but just the way they liked to fight. The crucifixions and genocides continuing merely because that was the way these new Night Lords liked it. By the end of the Crusade, the Night Lords were on the cusp of censure by the Imperium. In fact, many wonder why the Emperor had stayed his hand for so long when their atrocities were plain for all to see. They were barely trusted.
Yeah, I think for the most part, the Emperor really didn't give a fuck how they got their job done as long as they did it, because he was working on too many other things. He had too many other, fires going on in the kitchen to have to deal with and to really worry about, all these guys are torturing evildoers. They're torturing and crucifying and skinning, people that are against me. Oh no, I don't think the Emperor probably really cared at that point. Maybe, and that might have been also one of the major flaws and issues of the Emperor is, not having that kind of oversight. Maybe it would have changed things for the better in certain ways, and maybe him and his legion wouldn't have gone traitor had they had more oversight. Who knows?
His hand for so long when their atrocities were plain for all to see. They were barely trusted by the rest of the legions, often being seen as duplicitous or cowardly, willing to put other legions into the firing line to save themselves, and their Primarch Curze was roundly disliked and seen as unstable, his only ally being Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children. In fact, the curse of premonition had started to drive him into madness. He saw bloody futures where all order and justice had broken down, nightly visions of betrayal and disaster to come that grew more violent even as the Legion's actions became more and more extreme. When Rogel Dawn confronted him in the Cheralt system, Curze flew into a rage and almost killed his brother. And when Nostramo completed its slide backwards into darkness, the Night Haunter and his legion returned and destroyed the planet. For this, they were recalled to Terra for censure by the Emperor, Konrad, in his eyes, being unfairly criticised for exactly the actions the Eighth had been created to do at the start of the Crusade. But even after this, they teetered on the edge of sanction, fighting their own wars with no regard for the rest of the Great Crusade and proving impossible to rein in. It seems that by the time the heresy erupted, Konrad Curze and his legion had lost any dregs of faith in the Imperium and its Emperor, and their siding with Horus and his traitors merely provided them with an excuse to embrace a status many in the Imperium had already given them. That,
it makes you wonder, there's two legions that have been redacted from the history books. If a legion like the Eighth was never like purged or whatever, told to stop, forced to stop, punished, imprisoned, whatever you want to say, it makes you wonder what those redacted legions did or went through. I know there's some theories about, they might have had some kind of genetic malfunctions, or early in Space Marines legacy in general, they were slaughtered in a fight against some alien race, and so it would have looked really bad if the humanity's faith in the Space Marines had been broken. Those could all be possible, but it could also be possible that they were even worse than the Eighth were in these certain ways. So I mean, if that's the case too, who knows? Who knows what they did.
provided them with an excuse to embrace a status many in the Imperium had already given them, that of the renegade. At the start of the heresy, the Night Lord's strength was really hard to pin down. They'd been out of regular contact with Crusade High Command for so long. Estimates say between 90 and 120,000 legionnaires, but since they continued to recruit through the heresy and were long-term proponents of rapid gene seed acceleration, they could have been much larger than that, one of the biggest legions. Outwardly, they stuck close to the standard organisation of a Space Marine Legion, dictated by the Principia Bellicosa, and had access to all the weapons of any other Astartes Legion, though they tended to field fewer breacher squads or siege elements compared to the others. The only obvious change was their tendency to use Nostraman nomenclature for their units, claw or talon used instead of squad, and the continued display of grisly trophies and mutilated remains of their enemies on their vehicles. Their tactics and methods of warfare differed significantly though, and the Night Lords continued to employ the terror tactics and psychological warfare they'd used since their inception. The most obvious
And that was one of their strengths earlier on, from what I understand, was their, you know, terror tactics. A lot of the stuff that they did kept people in line so that they wouldn't betray the emperor to begin with. And that's part of, I believe, a lot of the issues that Konrad has, is they felt like the more violent they were, the less people would want to turn from the emperor. So it was still, you know, it was that greater good mentality of, you know, I'm keeping people from straying from the emperor and from the light and from the truth, you know.
Employ the terror tactics and psychological warfare they'd used since their inception. The most obvious outward sign of that was their specialist terror squads, but in truth the whole Legion had a preference for rapid strike forces, drop pods and jump pack assault, sabotage and infiltration, as well as merciless hit and run tactics that many other legions saw as nothing more than cowardice. And behind all this lay the complex structure of Nostraman courtly society, which split the Legion into a series of petty rivalries that could easily turn to violence.
That's
An
interesting.
example of this,
They almost kind of had like a chapter set up before that became like part of the codex or whatever. They have different divisions. Interesting.
the highest level, series of petty rivalries that could easily turn to violence. An example of this at the highest level was the Chiroptera, the Night Haunter's personal court of his most useful sons. Membership gave the Legionnaire no official rank, but unofficially it would be unwise for a Night Lord officer to refuse a member's orders unless they wanted to end up impaled on the lightning claws of the Atremnatar, Curze's personal enforcers. The many layers of courtly titles, the open rivalries, and the aloof nature of their lord meant the Night Lords could be a fractious legion, with some officers openly resenting or even hating their own Primarch, and the senior commanders often ruling through fear, threat, or the promise of favour rather than through bonds of loyalty. For the Night Lord's Legion, the Horus Heresy started during the drop site massacre on Istvan V. In fact, their first captain, Sevatar, was the first to declare the now famous cry, "Death to the false emperor." Along with the Word Bearers, Iron Warriors, and Alpha Legion, they were part of the second wave to assault Horus's forces and turned upon the loyalists of the first wave, cutting them down as they attempted to retreat, with Konrad Curze fighting the 19th Legion Primarch Korax on the edges of the battle. Later, Curze would take the 18th Primarch Vulcan prisoner, torturing him within a jail hulk attached to the Night Lord's fleet as they spread ruin and terror across the galaxy. But eventually their rampage came to a head on the Eastern Fringe during the Thramas Crusade, where they pinned down the Dark Angel's Legion with a series of attacks on Imperial worlds, designed to prevent the Loyalists from massing and outflanking the War Master's push to Terra. For 3 years they fought the Dark Angels, with Curze and Lionel Johnson finally coming to blows on Sagwalsa, which resulted in Konrad Curze being taken prisoner himself aboard the Dark Angel's flagship, and a large proportion of the 8th Legion deserting their lord and departing into the void. Curze would eventually briefly escape confinement to cause terror during the Imperium Secundus project on Ultramar before fleeing into the Warp. The Night Lords, by this point hated by their Primarch and split into hundreds of warbands, would fight on Terra during the siege. In fact, they were the first traitor legion to reach the walls fighting against the Blood Angels, but nowhere near in the numbers they once commanded as a legion, and they were some of the first to leave the siege to continue their reign of terror elsewhere. And that's the 8th Legion. Originally designed as a necessary evil, a sanctioned terror weapon to put fear into the hearts of would-be rebels, their initial purpose fell away when it was blended with the casual cruelty and sadistic violence of Nostramo, a world so dark even their Primarch could never escape it. As the Imperium grew, they became increasingly aware that it had no place left for them, and when the heresy erupted, they took the opportunity to revenge themselves on their former masters and then pursue their own ends. And that's where we find them in 40k, a host of independent warbands fighting the Long War, conducting terror raids into the Imperium and attempting to stay unaligned to any authority but themselves. Thanks for watching.
Interesting.
So if you'd like more of these, then click on the little thingy there to the right. The next Legion's probably about to come up. And if you'd like to see these videos,
not a Legion, you're lying.
The channel generally, well,
he's lying to us again.
Thing below.
Heretic. All right. Great video as always by Arbitarian. There, as always, will be a link down below in the description to this video without my commentary. So if you want to check out the original video without my pausing and commentary and interruptions, feel free to do so. And of course, to Arbitarian's channel, If you want to go over there and check out his 40k stuff, give him a like and a sub, all that good stuff. Interesting video. I'm very much looking forward to getting into Amber King's video on Konrad Curze and learning just more about him directly. I wonder, you know, I knew from the Sevatar video that, you know, he had kind of gone into the warp. I believe his legion, you know, because they're kind of acting independently, is one of the only traitor legions that hasn't like been corrupted by chaos, I believe. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's the case. So I wonder what would happen if he returns. And, you know, he went into the warp, so did he get corrupted by chaos, or is he like going on some kind of crusade of his own, just going through the warp and just going on a rampage, killing whatever he feels unjust, you know, killing demons, or showing up randomly during various fights that demons are having and just getting into the mix, or, you know, whatever. I'd be interested to hear kind of what he's been up to in that time. But I also find it interesting that, you know, he cleaned up his world, got the crime down to nothing, you know, became, I don't know, I don't think he ever really kind of ruled the world, the Nostromo that he was on, but he definitely put fear in the hearts of anyone that was wanting to do anything that he would deem unjust or any kind of criminal activity. So he definitely like had the world cleaned up. And then, you know, I find it interesting that as he left to do what the Emperor needed, his world fell back into the crime that it had seen before. And then so all of the recruits after a certain period of time just became worse and worse. And I just find it interesting how over time, you know, that also built up his hatred for those people that were under his command and his legion, and them hating him. I think that's kind of a unique thing. And obviously I feel like that probably drove, you know, him further and deeper into insanity kind of a situation. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that in the Amber King's video, and seeing, you know, how much that really affected him, and that affected his legion and their effectiveness and all that kind of stuff. So look forward to getting into that later on this week, and I'll have those out as soon as I can. But yeah, for now, that's gonna do it. Again, we're doing this reaction live for my YouTube members, so if you want to, you can click the join button down below, check out the YouTube membership tier, see if any of those have any kind of interest to you. Again, as always, link below down in the description to this and Albertine's channel. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider leaving a like and a sub. We greatly appreciate it. It helps me and it helps the channel grow. And yeah, hope you're having yourself a wonderful day, and I will see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.